Ever since I started wargaming as a hobby, I've struggled to learn the rules of the game. I can do it, it just takes a really long time. So I decided to sit down with my friend Emma to see if she had any ideas on how I could approach learning new rule sets and do it in a little bit of a more efficient way. If you're like me and you struggle to learn new rules, stick around and maybe you'll learn a few things that'll help you out as well. And if you like the work that I do, feel free to subscribe and hit that bell notification so that you'll know when I post my next videos. My name is Tanya, otherwise known as the War Mistress. I've painted some minis, I've played some games, and I'm on a mission to be nice and roll dice. My guest today is Emma, also known as Dice and Demons on YouTube and Instagram, and we are here today to talk a little bit about how we can learn to play wargaming a little bit faster because the learning process can be a little bit daunting. So thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Welcome. It's a pleasure.
So, why don't we start off with a little bit about your background? So, you were a high school teacher for a few years, so you sort of have a little
Two
bit of,
years.
yeah, you have a little bit of an idea of how sort of learning and education works, but why don't you give us a little bit of a brief history of
Just
yourself?
a brief history of being a high school teacher, and so
Sure.
I have a master's degree in the study of religion, which is like non-confessional, so all sorts of religions like Christianity and Judaism, Hinduism, and so on. And I also have studies in classical studies as well. So I went as a high school teacher and I taught religion, again non-confessional, and I taught classical studies, and I also taught a tiny bit of Latin. And I don't know if you can imagine, but high school students, like in Denmark, they're between 15 and 18, 19, something like that. They're not particularly interested in any one of those topics.
So trying to keep them
So,
engaged is a little bit
yeah,
difficult
that was
sometimes.
actually sometimes a little bit tricky. So trying to convince them that, yeah, like Homer and the Iliad is actually really interesting and really, really relevant.
Yeah. Um,
Yeah, it was a tough sell at times.
so how I got started on the like thinking about this topic is because I have a really hard time learning rule sets. Like it doesn't matter if it's like Dungeons and Dragons or Warhammer 40K or Frostgrave, like it could be the easiest rule set. It doesn't matter, but I have a really hard time learning them. So I thought maybe I could talk to somebody else and maybe we could brainstorm some ideas about how we could maybe make my learning process and maybe therefore our listeners or watchers' learning process a little bit shorter. Um,
Nice, because it can be like really time consuming getting into a new game.
Yeah, it is a lot of resources, like brain resources, time resources, just energy resources trying to learn.
Mm.
And it's a little frustrating for me because I always thought learning was something I was very good at. Um, but in the terms of rule sets, not so much, turns out. Um, and in my research for this show, I came across the learning styles, which I think everybody is sort of at least a little bit familiar with. But I also found out that those learning styles, the most successful learners use techniques from like sort of, they learn best using techniques that each learning style is sort of known for.
Mm.
So they sort of pick and choose little bits of all of them. So that's why I think maybe brainstorming for me will be a little bit of a a little bit of a way for me to learn a little bit faster. Are you familiar with the learning styles at all?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
So, yeah, should we just give a really quick description of the four?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
The
So you have like the visual first, where you like learn through watching stuff and reading stuff, and you have well, what's it called in English when like listening or
auditory.
auditory, exactly. So you learn by listening to the people. So that would be, if you are an auditory learner, you're really, I think, lucky, because that's what most classroom teachings is all about. You know, you have a teacher and the teacher's talking, and then you're supposed to be listening and understanding and learning. And I don't think a lot of people are actually that good at that.
I'm terrible
I'm
at
not,
it.
at least. Yeah. I could never focus. I had to sit and draw and stuff in classrooms when I was going to, when I was at school. So, and then you have a tactile, where you learn through like touching and feelings, and kinesthetic. Is it called kinesthetic in English as well? Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
So,
Yep.
yeah, for people who don't know me, English is not my first language, as you can probably tell. But we can always do this in Danish if you
Well,
want
I
to.
was gonna say I think that your English is actually better than mine, so I don't think that that's really a concern.
Yeah, so with kinesthetic, it's more like movement. So you'd be the some of the examples I have seen is like if you're trying to learn like multiplication, so you'd be like jumping, like skipping in a rope or something while trying to do it and stuff. Um, yeah, so those are the four major ones.
Okay. So as I said before, research seems to support the idea that using a little bit of each of these sort of styles is how we're most successful.
Hmm.
Um, I think that if let's just speculate. So if we say that the learning styles are a thing, I seem to be most comfortable in like the visual learning category. And that's sort of like where my default is, so I'm more familiar with those kind of techniques for learning. Do you think that you sort of lean towards one or the other?
Definitely a visual learner and also a tactile. Um, yeah, so like a combination of the two. But if I had to pick one, it would be a visual learner.
Visual learner, yeah.
Yeah, so the same.
Yeah, I think I read that like 65% of people or something like that are actually visual learners, so it's really interesting that classrooms are sort of geared towards more of like the auditory learners, but yeah, let's just start brainstorming some of the ways that people might, use these learning styles to learn specifically wargaming rule sets, but really any rule set.
Sure.
So let's start with visual learners then, since I guess the majority of us probably are visual learners. What I do, since this is sort of my comfort zone, is I make cue cards when I'm first
Hmm.
learning my army, and I color code the cue cards. So like, depending on, so I'm learning a new army for Warhammer. I'm actually learning two new armies for Warhammer 40K because,
So like really optimistic, is it?
well, if it doesn't go so well with one, like if the orcs thing kind of falls through, I've got the Space Wolf thing as a backup. Um,
Sure. Orcs never fall through, though.
it's
I mean,
true, they never lose.
yeah,
They just retreat so that they can fight another day and then they win, right?
yeah.
So yeah, I make cue cards, and on the cue cards I like color code the different like special abilities and stuff based off the like phase that I might use those.
Um, yeah.
So that's sort of like my key thing that I do to try and learn rules, and it does help. It speeds things up a lot faster than just reading and rereading the rule books. I find that it's like just white noise that just like filters in through my brain and then just immediately leaves if I don't have some sort of like writing process associated with learning. But can you
Yeah,
think of
I can't read a rule book at all. Just, I mean, I can, obviously, but I mean, it doesn't make any sense to me,
yeah, so that's how
because I can't visualize it in my head. So it's just random stuff.
yeah. Do you have any other sort of like visual ideas that people might be able to use?
Well, something I've tried doing, which is I think both visual and also tactile, is actually getting the models out on a table, just my own models, and then like, okay, so how far can they move? And I measure it out and I push them over the, like, just my dining room table or whatever. No terrain or anything, and just trying moving them and like reading it and applying it directly to the model. So no stress, no people, trying to play a game with me and being like really impatient that I'm so slow, which I am. Um, so for me that helps a lot because then I can actually see it. I
Hmm.
can see what does it mean to move 5 inches and how far can they actually shoot, and I measure it out and I try to see what, and all right, so we have this some sort of like a leader has a bubble and I can measure that. Okay, so the bubble of like 12 inches, wholly within 12 inches, and I can try and play a little bit with it, and that's a big help for me at least. And I
Hmm.
think that's both like visual but also like tactile because I actually get to move and touch and do stuff.
Hmm. Another
Yeah.
thing that I do, which I think kind of works as a visual learner as well, is I actually go through and I put sticky notes
Oh yeah.
inside of my codex, and the sticky notes are also color coded. So if people actually like picked up my codexes and opened it up, it would just be covered in like sticky notes. I know a lot of people really like Battlescribe. Um, for me, it doesn't enhance my learning process at all because I'm not interacting with those stats besides swiping up on a screen. Um,
It
s-
doesn't make a lot of sense to me either.
yeah, so I like to have
Um,
like the physical codex and I like
yeah.
to go through it. I also update all of like my facts and stuff. So once the fact comes down, I go through and I like stick a sticky note over the thing that changes and all of that. I like to have that like interactive sort of visual aid inside of the actual codex as well.
So this is, I think, easier to do in Age of Sigmar than 40k, where you have, if you go into Games Workshop's web page, they have like a war scroll for each unit,
Hmm.
and I just print it out and laminate it, and then I have it on the tabletop, so it's really easy to see. And then every time like a unit dies, I can just like physically take that war scroll and put it away. Like it's gone, no, doesn't work anymore. And
Yeah.
that's really big help for me to have those cards, so it's very visual. Okay, I have these units and they have these abilities, and this is all I have to think about, because at least for me, going through an entire battle tome or codex is it gets a little bit confusing. There are so many options for like an army like the orcs. You have, I don't know how many units you can have, so I easily get confused. So having those physical cards would be a really big help. I don't know why they don't do just like war scroll cards you can buy for 40k. I would love that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I essentially just make my own, right?
Yeah.
Like how Age of Sigmar, they have like the little circle that's like cut like a pie and it's got all of your
Mm.
stats and stuff in it. I essentially do that with all of my Warhammer 40k units that I'm using in this particular game as well. And then they're dual. I use like the big recipe cards, like the really big ones. So, and then I rewrite the rules in my own sort of words, if that makes sense.
Well, that's a really nice idea, because then
Yeah.
you have to have make sure that they actually make sense to you. Otherwise, you can't rewrite them.
Yeah, so like it's one thing to regurgitate like a
Yeah.
word for word verbatim what that rule means, but I find that when I rewrite them in my own words, it means that I actually understand what the concept is. And sometimes when I'm rewriting the rules, I learn right then when I'm making my cue cards, I don't fully understand what this means. And then I go and I source out people who know more than me, and then I get them to explain to me what it means. And then once I understand, then I can write it in my own words on the card. Um, but that works really
Like to
good for
make a
me.
cheat sheet for like my entire army. So like in
Yeah.
this phase you can do this, and then I can have it lying next to the war scroll cards and stuff. Because then I have like something. Yeah, for me it's also very physical. I need to have it like on paper. So I would never buy like a codex digitally.
No.
It just, I don't know. It doesn't work the same.
Yeah.
Um,
For me, like also I would be so slow. Like just reading this tiny little digital screen, like trying to like figure out what everything says. It takes forever, especially when you play a bit of like a horde army. So now you've got to move like 100 infantry, and you also don't know what they do. So now you're on a little scroll and you're scrolling, 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 scrolling. Yeah, no, I need to
and
have those cards.
And I have to be honest, I also think playing with someone who's constantly looking on their phone, I mean, I know
Mm-hmm.
they're looking at the rules, but somehow it feels like they're not fully there with you anymore. Whereas I don't get the same feeling when people are just looking in a book.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's just me, but it just feels like you're not fully present if you're looking at a screen. It has a, I don't know.
That's how I
Yeah.
feel when I'm looking at the screen, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I totally understand that. So yeah, I
But I
think
would
that
also always advise if you're taking notes, which I mean, well, as a former teacher, I like people taking notes. But I particularly like when people take notes by hand, and I know it's a
hmm
bit old-fashioned, but there has actually been research done on that, and it shows that if you take notes by hand, you do learn better than if you take notes and like write it directly onto a tablet or a computer or stuff. So
hmm
if you have the patience for it, I would really, really recommend like reading from a physical copy, but that's because there's also been research shown that that helps you learn, particularly a little bit more tricky stuff. You learn better by reading a physical copy, and you also retain the knowledge better by taking notes by hand. So I'm really old-fashioned, but then again, I mean, I taught classical studies in Latin.
I 100% agree with that. For me, I don't really retain anything that I type, and I mean, I don't retain everything that I write out by hand, but the retention is quite a bit better. And yeah, I mean, sometimes you learn to love your penmanship too, and it gives me an excuse to like use different colored pens and like get creative, and yeah, that just really helps me to retain stuff. So
Handwriting. So I have to type it afterwards, but I mean, then you
yeah,
do it twice, which is even better than just doing it once. So.
yeah. So why don't we talk a little bit about auditory learners because this
Hmm.
is definitely, I would say this is probably the learning style that I least identify with. So this is probably the learning style that I should pay more attention to because I might actually learn stuff better from these techniques. But do you have any ideas of things that auditory learners could
Um,
do?
well, I mean, you could always listen to podcasts. I mean, there are a ton of great podcasts out there who actually go through rules like really detailed. And I do listen to those because, like, when I'm walking my dogs and stuff, I like to listen to stuff. And I think a lot of the podcasts are doing a really great job. I don't understand anything, but I'm just so sort of entertained by it. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I can then go back once I've learned the actual rules. I can go back and re-listen to an episode and go, ah, that's what they meant. Like, very cool, very cool.
So do you find that like if you listen to the episode and then maybe you didn't understand it, but then you go through and you play a game and then you see the instance of that, you sort of understand more why that happened or like how to deal with that or
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly. And then I will listen to it again, actually, if it's like an army I'm really interested in. And then I will understand way better, and perhaps I will then actually learn something because now I have like a picture in my head of what's going on, and I can sort of, oh, okay, so that's when I move. Okay, so those two units. Okay, okay, yeah, sure. And then I can picture it in my mind
Mhm.
and actually use it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I
And for
had
me,
to
it's the same with battle reports. I'm so sorry. I think like YouTube battle reports. I know a lot of people really, really love them. I hate them. I think it's so boring. I should probably watch them. But it's just visually not very interesting to me.
mhm.
Like I was once playing at a tournament, and then my mom, who's very supportive, she was like, "Oh, I can come watch you play," and I was like, "Sure." Because that's not embarrassing. But you're welcome. Come, come and watch me play. So she came and she was like, after 10 minutes, she was like, this is not really a spectator sport, is it? No, it's not. Not at all. And I mean, I love Warhammer, but watching people play on, especially on a screen, it's just, oh,
Yeah, I'm kind of in the same boat. Like, and I'm always interested in like the people who love bat reps. I'm always interested in like what is it about bat reps that they love because for the most part, if it's like especially like a bat rep of the entire game, I just can't, like, my interest just does not stick with that. Sometimes
hmm,
if it's like a 30-minute or 40-minute sort of like recap of the important things that happen or like a recap of each phase, so like they recap the movement phase, then they recap the psychic phase. Those I can sort of stick with. But
I
yeah,
can't.
Yeah, it's
I've
just
never
really
ever
hard.
watched a battle red from start to finish, no matter how long or short. No.
Yeah, and it's like back when I used to play sports, I loved to play sports. I don't want
Hmm.
to watch sports, right? It's
No.
kind of the same thing. Like I like to do, but I
Yeah.
don't like to like watch other people do. Um,
No, but I can watch a bit longer if it's like I'm actually at the gaming club and people are right in front of me playing. But
mhm.
then I will usually also pick up the like bottles and look at them and look at a little bit what they're doing on the table, and it'd be really annoying because I can't keep quiet. So I'll be like, oh, that was an unlucky dice roll, huh? And they'll be like, go away. Um,
You can commentate my games any day. I think it would be so funny. So I was kind of doing some research into like the auditory learning style because
mhm.
I don't know anything. And some of the things that were recommended for auditory learners was to actually record their notes in audio and then play it back throughout the day, um, which it seems like it would be a lot of work, but I mean, maybe it's not more work than like rewriting out your notes in color-coded form. Um,
I think it would be particularly. But do
yeah.
you really want to like? I mean, at least for me, reading is way faster than listening. So
Hmm.
I mean, I could reread my own notes really fast, but having to re-listen to myself talk, so like reading them out loud, I would be so bored so quickly. But
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean, I could see
but the
how,
idea is cool. I like the idea.
yeah, like I could see how that would be very helpful, especially if you're a person who's always on the go, right? Like if you're a person who can't like devote 30 minutes to sit down and actually read your codex, like and
Mm,
reread it and reread it, I could see how having a sound bite on your phone and like if you're walking the dogs or you're out
mm,
grocery shopping or
sure.
something, you could just be listening to it. So I
Yeah.
could see how that would be very useful. Um, and then there was one other thing that I thought might actually work for me, and I have used this before without knowing that I was using it, but it's explaining your notes to others.
Mm,
Um,
sure.
and I think it's the same as like rewriting out your notes or
Yeah.
rewriting out the stuff you need to remember in your own words, right? Because it's really showing your understanding of the concepts rather than just regurgitating back out word for word verbatim what the rule is.
It might also make a lot of sense to just like perhaps when you're reading, just like reading aloud just to yourself. I find
Hmm.
myself doing that from time to time if I'm really finding something tricky, and then I'll read it aloud because sometimes listening to it while reading it um, actually helps me understand a little bit better. It's not
Hmm.
something I want to do all the time because, well, I mean, it also might get a little bit just slightly annoying for the rest of the household. Be like,
Yeah.
all right, so old boys, okay, so old boys, the movement of supposed to be like no, no, thank you.
Yeah, but sometimes because I do see myself as like a fairly new player, for Warhammer, but I've sort of cultivated like people around me who are experienced players, but who are also newer than me. So as I learn these new concepts from more experienced players, I sort of bring them in, and then I do like to share those concepts with people who I meet and people that I converse with. So yesterday, actually, I was explaining why a certain stratagem was really good. So I have a friend who plays Sisters of Battle, and she's struggling a little bit, so we were sort of, I don't know anything about Sisters of Battle, so I was sort of looking into it, and sort of figuring out how they work, because I have no idea. Nobody even plays them in my local meta. And then I found this stratagem, and Space Wolves have one similar, so I told her, I was like, oh, that stratagem is so good, and she didn't necessarily understand why I was so excited that she
Mhm.
had access to something like that. And I only just learned because I only just used it successfully in a game like 3 weeks ago. Um,
Yeah.
so I think like, and then I sort of was giving more like more examples of how you might use that stratagem, and it sort of was like encouraging me to think about that stratagem in new ways, and really like exploring that concept in greater depth. Um, so I do think that like explaining your notes to somebody else could be a really great way to really maybe not understand the concept initially, but to like solidify
Yeah,
a deeper understanding of what the concept means.
absolutely, absolutely.
All right, so that's auditory. So the next one that I have on the list is kinesthetic.
And sure how you would do that because that requires a lot of movement and standing at a table with Warhammer models. I mean, most people will be like, "Don't run in here," um,
Yeah.
which I have been told because I have a tendency to forget.
So I'm not too
Yeah,
familiar with this concept. Like, does it have to be strenuous movement?
no, no, it doesn't. It's just like moving where tactile is like your fingers, more or less like your hands and stuff.
Hmm.
The kinesthetic is more like the entire body in some sort of movement. It doesn't have to be like running or jumping or anything. Um, but I'm just not sure how you would incorporate that. I've been thinking about it since you asked me to be in this episode, and I was like, how would you do that? And I'm not quite sure. Perhaps I mean actually listening to something while walking perhaps would be like helpful,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
like going for a run. And if you're also auditory, of course. Otherwise, perhaps it's not very helpful at all.
Yeah, so I was doing a little bit of research as well because this
Hmm.
is like this makes more sense to me a little bit than like the auditory stuff.
Hmm.
But the main thing that I found when referring to the kinesthetic learning style was that taking breaks to be active was really key. So like for these kind of people and for everybody, sitting down for an hour to study something, your brain isn't really wired too well to do that. So taking breaks every 10 to 15 minutes to go do something, whether that be go take a walk or I have a stationary bike, so like to jump on the stationary bike and then come back to your studies. Apparently there's some research to show that you actually retain more if you study after exercise.
Makes sense to me. I wonder if it would make sense, like if you could, like if you had a treadmill or something, if you were like reading the codex while on the treadmill, not, I mean, not perhaps not like running full speed, but
Yeah.
like just walking. What would, if you could do something like that?
Yeah, so I actually used to listen to a number of competitive podcasts while on the elliptical at the gym.
Mhm.
And I did find that I retained a lot more. I feel like my focus was a lot better. Whereas if I'm just sitting at my desk, I feel like I have a lot of like stimulus around me. I have tactile things that I can be fiddling with. I've got my phone and everything like that. Whereas when I'm on the treadmill or I'm on the elliptical, or I'm on my stationary bike, the only thing that I can really do is listen, or if I'm on the bike, I can read. Um,
Yeah.
so I think also like yeah, for me I just found that like my retention auditorily from the information that I was listening to was a lot better
Mhm.
than if I was like
Yeah.
painting or doing something else with my hands while listening. It just I don't retain anything from that. Yeah. But
Yeah.
that's really the only thing that I found for like
Yeah.
the kinesthetic sort of learning
Yeah. I
style.
haven't really been able to really like work something really cool out. I mean, again, you could do stuff like trying to recite very very particular rules, like, well, that's like jumping or doing squats or whatever. But I think that is like a very niche thing to do. It's not something you can do for an, I mean, unless you're really really fit, perhaps.
I'm
I
not.
couldn't.
I'm
No.
not. uh,
And it's
um,
not, I mean, I don't want to be mean, but I don't think like wargamers are usually that fit. Most, some are
except
perhaps.
shout out to Stephen Box.
Yeah.
There's outliers everywhere.
Yeah, I
Um,
know, but at least I'm not that fit. I
no,
can't do squats while learning an entire new army. Sure.
no. No, I'm just like focusing on like not dying usually when
Yeah,
I'm when I'm
exactly.
doing exercise. Um, so the last learning style is like the tactile learning style, which I think actually really lends itself to learning war games because it's a huge part of the game
Absolutely.
itself.
Absolutely. That's why, yeah, that's what like separates it from like a computer game or whatever. Because I mean, you're standing there with the physical models in your hand, and you
Hmm.
have the dice, and you have the table, you have the terrain, and I think that's yeah, that's more or less the easy part. Just playing games, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, so like actually when you have the codex in front of you, it's like you said, right? You can take all of your models and you can say, okay, well, this is like a squad of boys, right? And you can
Mhm.
look through your notes, you can look through the stat line, and you can actually
Yeah.
like physically move the models to sort of solidify what those rules mean in
Yeah.
the real world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
Is
I think
there?
that just makes a whole lot of sense to me, at least. Like reading it and then pushing the models around, and I mean, and the great thing about like having models on the table is that it lends itself much way better to like sort of special effects, you know.
Pew 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 sounds.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, no, I guilty of the pew pew sounds for sure. Is there any other sort of like tactile things that you think people can incorporate into the learning process?
I think for a lot of people, myself at least, like listening to, for instance, a podcast or something while painting.
Hmm.
I mean, painting or building or whatever is a huge part of the model for a lot of people, right? And I know at least if I'm going to have to listen to something, I have to do something with my hands while listening. Otherwise, I'll just get really frustrated and really annoyed and learn nothing. But
Yeah.
if I'm actually sitting there painting and or building, um, it just works so much better. I mean, sometimes I can get distracted, like, oh, so should it be like pink or purple or turquoise here? Let me see. I mean, and then I like zone out, but then I can easily zone back in again. I
Yeah.
mean, you can just go back like 2 minutes or whatever. So
Yeah.
I think painting and building while listening is great for a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't know why that never really worked for me. I
No,
just I don't seem to be able to focus when I listen to stuff. Like even like it goes the other way too. So like if I'm listening to somebody speaking, whether that be like an audio book or a podcast, then I can't focus on my painting either. So I just end up this like unfocused ball of energy. And it's really
really frustrating.
yeah, so really I have to listen to very specific music while I'm painting, otherwise nothing gets done. It's the oddest thing. Um, but I guess that leads me into like my last concept that I wanted to sort of brush on, and that is being self-aware of what you need, right? So like, yeah, I know that I cannot focus on like a listening thing while I'm painting. Um, but that just sort of comes with time. Do you have any like thoughts on that sort of concept of self-awareness?
No, I think it Um, yeah, a little bit because when I was really new at wargaming and I started out with Age of Sigmar, which is also still the game I know the best. I was playing with someone and I constantly had to look up rules in my book, right? And he was getting annoyed and he was like, "Why didn't you just learn it all by heart? I mean, how difficult can it be? You bought the book, read it, understand it, retain the knowledge." And I was like, "Well, uh, I can't do that. I mean, I could have read it all, and I could have probably even have memorized it if I really, really wanted to. I did not, but I could have. But it would not have made any sense to me. It only made sense while playing the game, and I have to play a lot of like friendly demo introduction games before it really stuck for me. Um, and so I was like feeling ashamed almost, like, oh yeah, why didn't I just like read the entire thing and understand it? I mean, I should have. Why didn't I? And so I was spent a lot of time thinking about that because that was not a very fun experience. And then got to the conclusion that that is just not the way I learn stuff. And if people do not like that, then we are perhaps not, compatible while at least while I'm learning a new game.
Yeah.
So yeah, being not ashamed that you perhaps do not learn stuff like everyone around you seems to do.
Yeah. I think
Because it's a
that's
hobby. I mean, it should be fun, right?
absolutely, and it shouldn't ever be like stress, right? Like you shouldn't be
No.
stressing to learn the
Hmm.
rules or anything like that because at the end of the day there's enough stress in our lives that
Yeah,
it doesn't need to permeate our hobby as well. Um,
absolutely not.
I just wanted to leave people with the idea that if you are struggling to learn the rules of Warhammer 40K or Dungeons and Dragons or whatever your hobby of choice at the moment is, you're definitely not alone. Um,
Oh no.
there are a lot of people, myself included, who do struggle, and I mean, maybe the answer, if you're feeling like you're stuck, is to just try something different. Um, and I hope that we gave you maybe a few ideas that you didn't think of before that you might try, and I hope that maybe they help you to feel a little bit more comfortable at the game table.
Because it's really supposed to be fun. And my experience is that if you tell people, I'm really new at this game and I'm having a hard time like really understanding the rules before I actually play a game, would you be willing to play like a really slow-paced, friendly introduction game? Most people are just like really happy to see new people enter into the hobby, or even people who've been painting but never played or whatever. Most people are really, really friendly and want to help. So, I mean, perhaps just being a little bit willing to be a little bit vulnerable and saying, this is a little bit tricky for me and I'm feeling a little bit insecure. Could you maybe like take 3 hours out of an evening and help me? And most people are actually very, very willing to do that. They just think it's cool you want to play. They want to have more people to play, right?
Hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that entirely, and I think that that is a great place to end this conversation. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Emma. It's always a pleasure.
Always. It's so much fun. Thank you for having me.
So what do you think? Did we miss anything? Leave your comments down below and have your say. You can catch me all over the place. I stream live on Twitch, I post daily to Instagram, and I have a coffee account. So check me out on all those places, and I will catch you next time.